Hi everyone, Voltie here. Here to talk about my personal watch list as of the Aether Drift points change. If you missed the stream yesterday, there'll be a link down below to the YouTube video where you can watch Mouse and I talk about the Aether Drift points update. But as with the Foundations points update, I want to keep things as transparent as possible, and so I'm going to be offering my personal watch list. These are the cards that I view as potentially needing pointing or depointing, or at the very least, if they were to be changed, they may introduce a positive impact on the metagame. So first things first, the Aether Drift changes. Nadu went from 1 to 2, Demonic Council went from 0 to 1, and Abhorrent Oculus went from 0 to 1. I won't talk too much about these changes, just because they have already been discussed in the YouTube video, but if you would like to hear my personal thoughts on these, or if you want me to expand on them, please comment below and I'll be able to know that that's what you're looking for. The watch list changes, Force of Will went from 1 to 2, and EI went from 0 to 1. I pitched EI. I personally think that the EI 0 to 1 change could be beneficial to the community. It is relatively aligned with Brainstorm to 1, however I think it would be a more targeted impact, and considering the core of a lot of the Blue X mid-range decks tend to be Blue-Red, Expressive Iteration is a nice way to hit those decks without impacting the metagame as a whole or soft banning Brainstorm. So here's my personal watch list for pointings. First is 4th from 1 to 2, with the caveat that Flage would be going from 1 to 0. At the moment, Flage is really underperforming, and it's not showing up very much. When the points change happened where Flage went to 1, I was an advocate for 4th going to 2 and leaving Flage at 0, but obviously hitting as many cards as possible as opposed to some of the individual cards is a valid direction to take, and that's what we ended up doing. Going forward, if Flage continues to not show up, and it continues to underperform, and 4th Eolingus continues to be splashed, or represents a very real threat at 1, then this might be a change that could be reasonable. Time Walk 5 to 6 or Spellseeker 1 to 2. Walks doesn't perform super well. It's not a broken deck. It doesn't take up large percentages of the metagame. However, this pointing would be very individually targeted. Time Walk as a card is the best card in our format, and it is not particularly close. When we look at the other 5-point cards, which are Recall and Mana Crypt, we can see a pretty large gap in between them and Time Walk, which is also reflected in play rate, despite it being a several $1,000 card. One of the changes that I have sort of been thinking about is bringing Spellseeker down to 0, with the condition that Time Walk goes to 6, so that that package stays the same number of points, but other decks are able to have access to Spellseeker as a nifty tutor card. But going forward, I'm keeping an eye on it. If we get to a point where people are really invested in buying into walks, because it is just the best mid-range thing to be doing, it's possible that its play rate, despite being low, will account for very high performance values. Next up is Reanimate or Entomb. So Reanimate from 1 to 2, Entomb 0 to 1. Honestly, I would be fine with both of these changes at the same time. And that's not just because the recent metagame shift towards Reanimator out of the combo players. Reanimate as a card is 2 points more powerful than every other reanimation effect we have. I believe that the difference in 1 and 2 mana makes it 2 points more powerful than Metamorphosis Fanatic, than Animate Dead, than Dance of the Dead, than Life Death, than Exhume and Emperor of Bones. It's just a completely egregious card, and the fact that people are able to play Reanimate without devoting energy into turning it on just really shows that the card is very powerful at 1 point, and people are willing to spend the point on it. If it gets to 2, we'll get to a point where people are only playing Reanimate with the intent of actually putting something like Atraxa into their graveyard, as opposed to a Troll of Khazad-dûm. Entomb 0 to 1, this one's a bit iffy. A lot of the community is split on this. Some people think that Entomb is the bee's knees, some people think that it's card disadvantage. Realistically, it is both of those things. Entomb is sometimes a 1-mana demonic tutor, and it notably puts the card that you want where you want it to go, which is the graveyard. Unfortunately, if Entomb went to 1, we would lose all of its value plans, like Life from the Loam, for example. But I think it would be perfectly fine if the reanimated decks got hit with Entomb, just because the card on an individual power level is really obscene. It's so much better than Faithless Looting or Careful Study or any of the other ways you can get a card into your graveyard. Next up is Underworld Breach / LED. I'm not certain which of these changes is more important. I'm not really certain that hitting Lurrus Breach is necessary. However, when we look at the individual cards, Underworld Breach is much closer to Thassa's Oracle or Time Vault or Black Lotus as the 4-point cards, and LED is an incredibly egregiously powerful card. It is literally Black Lotus 80% of the time. Sometimes it's not on and sometimes it's a brick, but that doesn't really matter because it's very uniquely powerful when you need it to be. I would be fine with either of these changes. They would most likely be aligned with some of the depointings, which we'll get to in a moment. Next up is Deathrite Shaman from 1 to 2. DRS is very repeatedly shown that it is one of the best 1-point cards. It is the reason that Bayou and Tropical Island show up anywhere near as much as they do. The fact that Deathrite Shaman continues to appear at a very high play rate and also performs very, very well. Deathrite Shaman is closer in value and threatening ability to Ragavan, which is another 1-point creature. A 1-mana creature. But Ragavan's at 2 and Deathrite's at 1, and I genuinely believe Deathrite is better than Ragavan. The next up is the fast mana pointing, so Sol Ring from 3 to 4, City of Traders from 0 to 1, or Ancient Tomb 1 to 2. This is definitely just one of the 3, it's not going to be all 3, that would be very egregious. I think Sol Ring going to 4 would bring it more in line with Mana Crypt, and further away from the Moxen, and I think it serves that purpose in the vast majority of decks that it's played in. A lot of those decks are playing Urza's Saga in order to get their Sol Ring, and we're now reaching a point where people are playing Urza's Cave, an expedition map, to go get their Saga, to make their guys, to make a Sol Ring, to make more mana to do more things. City of Traders is very close to Ancient Tomb. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's the same. My only concern with pointing City of Traders is that it's a very expensive RL card, and anyone who has sunk in the resources to buy into the card and expecting it to stay at 0 might be dissuaded from the format. So in that sense, it's possible that Ancient Tomb going to 2 is a bit more reasonable. If we're hitting one of the soul lands, we're more likely to inflict splash damage onto black-red mid-range decks and red-white mid-range decks, and if that's not the direction we want to take, then hitting Sol Ring or Mana Vault, for example, would be fine. Next up is Tamiyo from 0 to 1. Tamiyo is not as powerful as Ragavan or Deathrite Shaman, but it is very, very close to being in the top 3 or the top 4 or the top 5 best 1-mana creatures ever printed. A lot of the really, really good 1-mana creatures ask a fair amount of you. So Mother of Runes, to turn her on, you need to have a deck with a lot of creatures. Ragavan, to turn it on, you need a lot of removal and maybe some spell interaction. Tamiyo has flying, gets to attack. Most of the time, if your opponent can block it, it's still not going to die, and it threatens to win the game very, very quickly. It offsets the... it exacerbates the play draw issue. If you both have a Tamiyo but one of you is on the play, the game is probably over. And so this would be a very targeted pointing. I think the card is probably close to 1-point value. I think it's, on average, probably going to be more powerful than something like Orcish Bowmasters. Maybe not Murktide Regent, but they do fulfill a very different role. Flash from 3 to 4. Flash as a 2-mana instant win the game button. is very close to Breach. It's very close to Thassa's Oracle. It's not as consistent in winning the game, but more cards work with Flash than with Thassa's Oracle, so I'm surprised it's still at 3. I'm not super convinced that having Flash at 3, when people are willing to play Worldly Shooter because it's 0, for Fnatic, which is also 0, you reach a point where all of these bits and pieces at 0 that are a little bit less powerful than they need to be are offset by you discounting your point package by playing Flash when it's 3, when it maybe should be 4. Lastly is Tinker from 1 to 2. They're going to keep printing really big, scary artifacts. I wasn't on the committee when Tinker went to 1. I did notice a lot of the changes that occurred from it. I have noticed some of the changes that have occurred after the fact. Tinker decks aren't taking over the format or anything, but as a card, it is still one of the premier win cons in a lot of decks. It's very, very easy for it to just win the game on the spot. And over time, they're just going to keep printing artifacts that work with Tinker. Portal to Phyrexia, for example, got printed a couple of years ago, and that was the new big artifact that didn't win the game on the spot like Citadel does. So it's something I'm keeping my eye on. For D-pointings, a lot of these are going to be very similar to the Foundations watch list. Recall I still think is not worth 5. Time Vault I still think is not worth 4. Imperial Seal is very, very embarrassing at 2, especially when Vamp Tutor is at 3 and is so much more powerful than Imp Seal. Not just because we're in a world of Metamorphosis Fnatic, but because instant speed and sorcery speed is a huge difference. Oko from 2 to 1, we're in a world where Oko isn't the be-all and end-all like it used to be, and I think it would probably be fine to see what it does at 1. If people are splashing for it in Grixis, I wouldn't be that surprised, but at the same time, that's not going to be the end of the world. It's a 3-mana Planeswalker that doesn't impact the board immediately, and it generates you extra threats, but a lot of people are playing very reasonably statted creatures that can rumble with 3/3s, where an army of 3/3s used to kind of just run people over. Gifts and Wishclaw Talisman, I'm going to lump these together. They're both very, very mediocre shooters in the world of 2025. Crop Rotation, I understand that we removed it from the watch list as of Aether Drift. However, if we keep an eye on Tolarian Academy and the cards around it and the packages around it, we might be able to get to a point where it can go back to 0. Natural Order from 1 to 0. This kind of has a caveat of putting Atraxa to 0 to 1. Natural Order as a card is very, very bad. It requires you to play small creatures and large creatures in the worst color. So it asks a lot of you. It does give you a very high payoff when it works, but it usually doesn't work is the issue. If we bring Eno to 0, it's probably likely that people will free roll it in decks that are naturally playing some green token creatures or some mana dorks. And honestly, Atraxa going to 1 would also be reasonable. The gap between, like, it used to be that your big reanimator targets were kind of all the same, and then Grizzlebrand got printed, and then the gap was really, really big. And then Archon and Atraxa and Valgavoth got printed, and the gap shrunk again. But over time, we're realizing that the gap between Atraxa and every other big creature you can put into play is widening. As more card types are being present on cards that are just playable, the odds that Atraxa draws you 3 cards is going down, and the odds that Atraxa is drawing you 5 or 6 cards is going up. And so the natural counterplay, or the natural valve to reduce Atraxa's power level, is getting turned down. The next 3 are all tutors as well. ET, Gamble, and Profane Tutor. All of these cards are completely terrible. If we can put Breach or LED up a point, Gamble would be pretty safe to go to 0. ET would be pretty safe to go to 0. Profane Tutor is kind of just very, very mediocre. It is so much worse than Demonic Council, and while Demonic Council was at 0, it wasn't backbreaking. We saw a resurgence in black combo decks, but it wasn't enormous, and Profane Tutor is so much worse than Demonic Council. Lastly, Dig Through Time from 2 to 1. The control decks don't really exist right now, and Dig Through Time is a very, very good combo card, but those decks are more likely to want to play tutors because there are so many A plus B combos, rather than Dig Through Time, which helps with A plus B plus C combos. And Dig Through Time is definitely the control delve spell of choice. If we leave Treasure Cruise at 2, then I don't think it's going to cause people to cut Treasure Cruise to play Dig Through Time, or to cut Gush to play Dig Through Time, because blue is a very real cost when you're playing a draw spell. That's it from me, so let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you have any questions, you can put them there. Otherwise, if you wouldn't want them to be on a public forum, you can DM me. I'm available in the 7-Point Discord. But otherwise, that's it from me for the Aether Drift personal watch list update.